This week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
the new Dungeon Master's Guide artwork dropped in the last week, immediately after last week's Lorecast.
I like it.
AI art is permanently here to stay.
It's more non-news around AI.
Adam Bradford just can't stop himself from working for VTTs.
Wherever he goes, I don't see Adam failing.
all that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. It is time for a dice picnic. Let's crack out the snacks. Let's get out our books of art. Let's get out our RPG books and put them in front of us, and we're going to look at the rules, and then we're going to decide how we're going to play this RPG. My name's Ben Byrne, if you're wondering who this weirdo speaking into your ear holes is. And I'm joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and James, I have a question for you. What is an iconic villain of your own making that has become somewhat canonical within your playgroup?
Very good question. I would say it would be the death god Nebra, who I cobbled together from. This is one of my earliest D&D villains, actually. This is from a campaign where I had Vecna as the main villain, but he was he was not the lich that we all sort of know and love today. It was sort of an iconic name I decided to pull. He was this sort of former fallen cleric of a sun god that had wound up in the worship of one of the two moon gods that granted necromantic power to this world. So together, Nebra and Onhalt were gods of death and fear, and there's all this very detailed cosmological stuff going on. That's kind of similar to what Mercer is doing with Ruidus and Critical Role, which I think is kind of neat. So yeah, this sort of like moon of death and despair would be on the cover of my DMG.
Nice. I like it. Shawn Merwin, what about yourself?
I am the villain in my own campaign, and I should be on the cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide.
That's not a bad idea. I like the idea of a DMG having like hands spreading out into a dark hood that's like empty, and it's like you, or it's the faint shadowed face of Shawn Merwin.
It's literally just like Shawn's yearbook picture.
Yes. Think of the children.
D&D. DMG.
DMG.
Dael Kingsmill, what about yourself?
If I had my way, if I had my choice, it would probably be like Eileen, the Burner Prince, who began as a villain in my home game, later had a second life as like specifically the god that my Fori invoker venerated, who's, based on Irish folklore. There's all this stuff going into it, but knowing the villain that has been picked up by my players and brought up again, the most times it's a goblin that on the fly was named Fatmouth Edgar. And I haven't escaped it. And I'm pretty sure that was the first game I ever ran for my friends. So it's gotta be the goblin leader.
That's an incredibly D&D story. That's a YouTube short right there. Is Fatmouth Edgar being horrified? I don't know. Anyway, moving on. I think my players would cry if I created a DMG with my artwork. I would think of Lord Cygnus Devereaux, who was a Rakshasa who paraded as the lord of a realm, and nobody knew that they were a Rakshasa. They had lived for centuries kind of pretending to be their own descendants and cousins and brothers and things to maintain control of this realm. But they started as the party quest giver, and they were sending the party out to fix problems within the realm that the party had to kind of realize they were the source of in the first place. And what the party were actually doing was oppressing the people of this realm by doing Devereaux's bidding before they realized what was going on. And the reason the party would cry is because this was like a year-long campaign. They got to the climactic battle. They were fighting Cygnus in their lair, crawling through like dimensional rifts and things, and it ended in a TPK. As an incredibly narratively satisfying yet dissatisfying villain victory of that campaign.
Love that. It's also pretty much the plot of the first Assassin's Creed game.
True.
Just for Dael Kingsmill's Assassin's Creed watch for the day.
That's true. Speaking of villains gracing the covers of books, the new Dungeon Master's Guide artwork dropped in the last week, immediately after last week's Lorecast. Do we like it? Does it look cool? Are we happy with Venger? James, you are muted. Venger has cast silence.
I cast Dispel Magic. It's a little less focused than the 5e version. I love how, tightly focused in we are on a Serarak on the 5e DMG. But it looks great. I love that Tyler Jacobson, the artist for this, modeled the female villain whose name I do not know on his wife, Kate Welch.
Ayo.
Wife and former D&D team member, I should hurry to add.
If this was like the 90s, there would be a "my wife's a villain" kind of joke in here. But I don't think that's what's going on. I like it. I woke up and was immediately tired again because there was so much discourse happening on Twitter that was like, yeah, D&D are trying to create their own sort of Marvel-style multiverse with these characters and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't think they are. Like, I think if you have a character that's like an Easter egg, that's like an evil wizard that some people will recognize but most people won't, why won't you use it? Like, sure, why not have an evil wizard on the cover? I just don't get it. It's like, I didn't know that the guy on the cover of the previous one was a character.
Yeah.
For most of my life as a D&D person. Like, it happened publicly on Twitter that I was like, who the hell is a Serarak? And Matt Colville was like the guy on the cover of the book that you use all the time. That was before people knew I don't use the DMG very much at all. But it was just kind of, I don't know. To me, I'm like, oh, evil wizard man. Yes, fun, good.
Yeah, I have to admit, I saw a little bit of discourse around like Wizards of the Coast are turning D&D into a franchise hellscape of licensing because they're using these characters that nobody knows who they are, but they have some history in the background. And I'm like, it's a Serarak has been on the DMG for the last 10 years. Like they're doing the same thing they've always
Tradition.
done, Like, yeah, I think that's an incredibly bad faith take.
Like Michael says in chat, it's the 50th anniversary. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Venger.
The
Is it
Venger
Venger
must
or
be
Venger?
coming.
Yeah, that's what I thought
It
it should
has
have.
to be Venger because otherwise I will never take it seriously.
Skylar Warduke, oh my, on the cover of the DMG, meant to represent kind of the multi-tiered foes that a party will fight over the course of their campaign, going from skeletons to Warduke to Skylar, and then finally taking on the boss. I like it. I think it's a cool concept. Did we see the alternative art cover with the spider lady?
Oh, no,
cool.
I love this one of Lolth. Death by Spider Goddess has never looked so cozy.
It does.
I want to
does.
get that. Just sounds like the perfect way to die in a web hammock.
How do you want to die? I want to die in the arms of the spider goddess. In the arms.
And you can quote me on that.
I love the weaving that's going on. It feels very Dungeon Mastery to kind of be bringing the threads of fate and story together. I think is maybe what they were going for. I don't have any notes about it in front of me here because I forgot while I was doing the run sheet. But it's a cool art piece. I have seen it.
The folks on the Monarchs Factory Discord are really back and forth on which cover they prefer out of the two of them.
Which one do you prefer?
Me?
Because that'll probably settle the debate on the Monarchs Factory.
I like them both. This is so unhelpful and uninteresting a take. I like them both a pretty similar amount. I feel no particular longing to die in the 8 arms of the spider goddess, but I like it. This is good. This is good. This is good stuff. Dante, keep all of this in. But I also like the mix of colors and the blurriness of colors in the standard cover. So
I have looked at them several times, and if you ask me what's on the cover, I would not be able to tell you. That's where my brain goes with art. Will it stand out if it's up on a shelf? Would people say, "Oh, I have to go look at that"? That's my criteria for is it good or not. If it stands out, if you remember, other than me, if you, a normal human being, remember what it is and can be drawn to it, then great. That works for me.
you know what would stand out is a picture of Shawn Moen.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
To get attention.
Uh-huh.
Speaking of object permanence, AI art is permanently here to stay because it just keeps coming up in the news. Folks that weren't in the know, this kind of came up over the weekend. Wizards of the Coast added a job posting specifically for a principal AI engineer to, quote, explore new uses of AI for all levels of game development, which would include designing, building, and deploying systems of intelligent generation for text dialogue, audio and assets, NPC behaviors, and real-time bot frameworks. They should bring an understanding of the ethical ramifications of using AI in our work and be able to speak to how to ensure ethics are embedded in what we do. Everybody hit the panic button and catch fire to everything. Ah!
That was good. I watched like 3 different people, one after the other, on Twitter sort of go, Wizards is using AI art for D&D after saying they wouldn't, and then saying, oh wait, someone else asked them for feedback and they did already comment on it and it's actually for video games and that's not my area, so I won't speak to it. And then another person would pick up from that person and be like, D&D is going to use AI art, and then they would go, oh wait, so-and-so, and every single one of the tweets would have Wizards care to comment, and then underneath they'd have to be like, oh, they already have. And I did think that was very funny. Having said all that, it's still not good. Like, it's still, I understand that they're not breaking what they said with MTG and D&D and using AI when they said they wouldn't, but I still don't like the news that Wizards of the Coast are hiring AI engineers for use in all levels of their game development for video games.
AI means different things to different people. Sometimes we hear AI and we just immediately trigger to, it's the worst thing ever, when the AI isn't even AI. So if AI means one thing to one person, it's going to be, we need to find a way to use this new technology in our games, our video games, which doesn't steal from folks, which only trained on our own internal things. That's a whole different discussion than generative AI, which scrapes and takes from other folks, right? And the other thing to remember is Hasbro has investors, and those investors are going, how are we using AI, Hasbro? How you want us to vote for your things, give you more money? How are you using AI? And Hasbro goes, oh crap, that's right. We need to do something with these folks. All right, let's put out a job saying we're going to hire someone that knows how to use AI, and they're going to use AI with no intention of hiring said person, with no intention of using AI, but they have to do that on the business side to quell the investors. That could just as easily be how this is happening than anything or anywhere else. It's more non-news around AI.
You know, Dael, I was one of those people who was followed up on Twitter when I said something to the lines of, well, good that this was a false alarm, right? After Christian Hoffer, comicbook.com, got in touch with Wizards. Like, good thing this is a false alarm. And many people responded to me saying, more or less what we're talking about now, yeah, in tabletop, but we don't want to see AI being used anywhere. And I'm like, I fully agree about that. I can't do much about AI being used anywhere else but in tabletop, which is why when we start to get ground down by all of this is what, the 20th, 30th time we've talked about some new AI menace threatening to plagiarize from artists and writers and drive creative people out of jobs. You know, this sort of normalization tactic is designed to wear us out. Or if not specifically designed to wear us out, then it has the effect of wearing us out, so we stop talking about it. And so I'm glad we keep talking about it. The most important thing we can do is just not support projects that have AI involved in them. And specifically, I'm talking about this sort of plagiarism style AI. You know, AI tools like, something that will write emails for you. That's one thing, just like you were saying, Shawn, but to create art, to create graphics, to create 3D meshes, not only are they bad, but they draw upon the actual work of human creatives, who in most cases right now have not consented to have their works used to train these data sets. So what power do we have? Well, as members of the tabletop industry, the 4 of us here can speak out about its use in tabletop. But when it comes to video games, we are consumers just like everyone else. And so we can make our voices known by not supporting those kinds of products.
Yeah. In a private space that I'm in, with designers, developers, and so on. Someone prominent in the industry came forward and basically asked, what do y'all think of AI? And I think it's safe to say overwhelmingly it was no. Not in tabletop, not in any way that threatens the livelihoods of creative folks who make a living doing these things for so many reasons. And we've listed them all before. We don't need to list them all again.
Yeah, also out of that discussion came that I think, and I can only speak for Ghostfire, but most companies that are creating RPGs have, similar to Wizards, honestly, anti-AI clauses within their freelancer contracts that say that this work cannot include anything produced by an AI. My hope, it was kind of roasted a little bit on Twitter, but my hope is that line that's in the job description that I read out before about someone who understands the ethical ramifications of using AI and being able to speak to ensure ethics are embedded in what we do. I doubt that was like some smokescreen for Twitter. Like the person who wrote that job description was not thinking, I'll put this in here to fool those fools on Twitter. So I hope probably what this could be, and this is just as much speculation as being negative about it, maybe they're looking at what they talked about, I want to say like 6 months ago, about AI creation tools that draw on Hasbro-owned artwork and kind of things that they have over their history to create something that's like a customer-facing tool. Like create your character, your D&D character using AI art for your D&D Beyond profile. And you can, and it's drawing only on what has existed before in the bottomless bucket of fantasy
Even then,
characters.
though, the artists who contributed that work, how can their pay have reflected the cost of that kind of thing? You know what I mean? Like the amount that they will have been paid for the art that they contributed won't have factored in that kind of a thing.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of like a similar but different argument to what's going on in voice acting and acting circles in terms of like residuals are a pay structure that exists, but it doesn't. You can't just mash this new technology into the pre-existing system of payment and have it kind of work. That equity doesn't kind of balance out in the same way. And so there's just like weird stuff with that. It's like with streaming technology, a whole bunch of copyright stuff got jacked up, right? Like all these TV shows that have like great soundtracks and whatever, that they paid for the rights for that music, but it was only for free to air TV. And now that streaming services exist or DVDs exist, you can't just map that directly on. New technology really comes in and screws with pre-existing kind of legislation in that way. And can be, it's just shaky ground is what it is. Cause I think that idea is sick as hell, but we it's complex, it's convoluted. But I mean, to speak to what Shawn was saying as well, like there's this element where you're looking at, I suppose, the idea of the potential for use of AI in every level of developing games, to me does ping a little bit of a red flag. But if I actually stop and think about like the individual layers, I think there are places where this kind of technology, this sort of machine learning technology, can be really useful in getting to this kind of next era in game development and technology. Like if we think about the last time there was a huge step up in terms of open world games where the system could now generate trees and grass in a way that was more realistic, right? That was an incredible step in gaming. If we can apply machine learning to that kind of stuff, of course it's going to be amazing. And I don't think it's unethical to like use machine learning to train the program to generate more realistic environments and things like that. I think that kind of direction, that there is definitely space for this technology to be used ethically, which I do also think is funny because I feel like ethics and morals are such funny, like we load those terms as though it's like, yes, these are the good things, but of course, you could ethics can be embedded in it. Like your ethics will just be different. Whatever, it's fine. The point is, everything is complicated. Why do you have to go and make things so complicated?
Very musical today.
I can't stop.
Speaking of not being able to stop things, Adam Bradford just can't stop himself from working for VTTs because in the news just this morning, Adam Bradford, famed for founding D&D Beyond before it was purchased by Wizards of the Coast a while ago now, but he founded it many years before that. Kind of the architect in some ways, I believe. James, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, of D&D Beyond. And then once D&D Beyond was purchased by Wizards, Adam was like, see you later. I'm going to go start my own project over here, and started Demi-Plane. And then we had Vampire Masquerade Nexus and Pathfinder Nexus and Daggerheart Nexus and all the Nexuses. And that's there too, and that exists, and that's great. And now Adam Bradford, I'm doing a terrible job of this, is moving over to another company called Fantasy Grounds. Does anybody use Fantasy Grounds?
I have and do, and it's on my desktop right now. I don't use it all the time. It's kind of a lot.
I have and do not, because I did not like it when I used it. I ran a whole Princes of the Apocalypse campaign on Fantasy Grounds, and it just didn't suit my needs. It was too heavy for my needs. I like a nice, light, sleek, streamlined virtual tabletop.
I strongly suspect that it's a better experience as a player than a DM.
I would believe that. There was a lot of stuff going on for a DM, which I think some DMs would really appreciate, right? They like having every possible imaginable tool at their fingertips. It was way too much for me to learn all at once. But, one thing I was talking with you about before the show began, Ben, said Adam is a guy who is driven by his passions, right? He was passionate about D&D. So when he was at Curse, one of the head honchos at Curse, which was known for Wowhead and Hearthstone and other sort of, collections of data about games. You don't know about those? It's like the World of Warcraft database and the Hearthstone database.
I'm gonna be honest. I never thought Hearthstone would be a word that would leave James Hake's lips if I had a bingo list.
I played so much Hearthstone in college, dude. So much.
Fair enough.
That's what I knew Curse from. That's what most people knew Curse from. And then out of the blue, there was another hyperlinked encyclopedia for Dungeons and Dragons, D&D Beyond. Very much the same sort of DNA as those two earlier things. Between D&D Beyond and Demi-Plane, there was Cortex Prime, which I don't think many people know about, but it's the underlying RPG for a lot of Cam Banks's role-playing games, things that are mostly IP-driven, like Marvel and Firefly and Leverage and things like that. And so there was a big attempt made to create this new sort of passion project on the back of D&D Beyond. And for one reason or another, Adam was stymied in that attempt, and he moved on from D&D Beyond around the same time that I moved on from D&D Beyond, and Todd Kenrick moved on from D&D Beyond and did this other thing. And so when I see Adam Bradford moving on from Demi-Plane, my mind tells me, and this is totally speculation, of course, it tells me that there was something he wanted to do, and he wasn't able to do it under the current paradigm, and so he moved on. Which is why him going to Fantasy Grounds is shocking to me, because that's an extremely well-established platform. I would have expected him to go from Demi-Plane onto something, new, a new startup, something totally unexpected. But to go to Fantasy Grounds, which has been doing D&D virtual tabletop stuff for ages, my only guess that he has something totally paradigm shaking in the works with them.
Yeah, maybe. This is, again, is speculation, but as we were touching on when I kind of broached this topic around Fantasy Grounds being this kind of impenetrable virtual tabletop, if you're not in the know, you're not in the know. And for the record, I had to double check the name of the company because I always get it confused with Foundry, because they kind of live in the same space in my brain as just these, you need a gaming PC to run them, and you need this, that, and the other, and it's all this work, and you got to set up your maps.
I ran Fantasy Grounds on my very small, very struggle street laptop for many a month.
What I'm saying may not be factually true at all. It's just the impression that I get, and possibly the place that they live in.
Better with a gaming PC.
Where they live in folks' head. Whereas D&D Beyond, and I think Demi-Plane as well, kind of live in folks' head as a way to make playing games easier. It is easier to access the character sheet and create a character without having read the player's handbook if you're using D&D Beyond. And I said off air, I'm thinking about putting together a Vampire Masquerade campaign at the moment, and have thought, well, I could use Demi-Plane, create a character there as a way to help teach myself how to create characters using Vampire Masquerade, and then use the physical rulebook as a reference when I want to learn, specific things. But when I think of Fantasy Grounds or Foundry, and this is personal to me, I start to get a headache because as a GM, I don't want any technology that's going to make my prep time longer. And I feel like a lot of VTTs do that. And for some GMs, that's their jam. They want to create these very realized, very tactile, very visually engrossing worlds using these VTTs. But for me, I would rather that all kind of live in my mind and the whiteboard markers that I use to draw maps on the table, or approximations thereof. So I'm wondering if, this is all to say, Adam Bradford moving over to Fantasy Grounds is potentially a way to find making that more, I don't want to use the word palatable, but just more accessible maybe to folks who want to use it in a more casual way. Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm just quickly checking this Geek Native article again. Something they said was that they want Adam Bradford to help expand Fantasy Grounds kind of market share. I assume they mean of the VTT space, do they feel like they're a little boxed off?
Yeah, Adam definitely has connections through all of these different ventures he's had. The other thing to remember is Wizards of the Coast, in my experience, does not go out and buy other things. There's a little bit of hubris I've seen over the years, not any particular person, but just this sort of, yeah, we can do that. We can do that better than anyone else can. And so when they actually bought D&D Beyond, that is a huge recognition that was the top of the line, could not be duplicated piece of property. Adam did that. He had lots of people working with him and for him, but that was his vision. And then when he went off to Demiplane, that's a tough transition, going into a whole separate paradigm, even though it's the same sort of industry. And what they have there is incredible. What they have there is powerful, with lots of partners who have bought in. Wherever he goes, I don't see Adam failing. And I don't see him stepping into a situation where he does not have a very good idea of what he wants to do and how it can be done. So that makes me very interested in what Fantasy Grounds is going to do. And you mentioned Foundry. Foundry just announced a digital-only role-playing game that would be specific to Foundry, called Ember. And Roll20 did this with Burn Bright. And I don't know much about it. I never played Burn Bright. I know some of the people that worked on it. And I know that they are very good designers, but it didn't take off to the point that I thought it might. And so as Foundry steps in to do something similar, I'm like, what do they know that I don't, that says this is a really good idea? And so when I saw he was moving, I'm like, oh, he must be going to Foundry. Maybe there's this connect. I'm like, no, it was Fantasy Grounds. Okay. Okay. We'll see how this goes.
Man, Burn Bright was a great game. I play tested that. James Introcaso, who's leading the MCDM RPG, designed that game. So good. So unique. I want someone else to use that dice system desperately. And I think it was extremely ahead of its time. I wonder if Foundry will prove that it was about 5 years ahead of its time. Though I fear Foundry may prove it was more like 10 or 15 years ahead of its time.
I'd be interested in a digital-only role-playing game. I have no knowledge of Burn Bright or Ember, the previous of which sounds much more ambitious just by the name. But anyway, that's what I immediately thought. But I think it could be cool if a digital-only RPG could do something that you couldn't do physically. And I'm thinking of, what this reminds me of is Gwent, the Witcher tabletop card game.
There it is.
Which I played a lot of kind of through 2020 to like 2022 maybe, or 2021. Anyway, the thing that I realized playing it, especially where that game ended up as in its kind of later years as I was playing it, was that it does things that would be incredibly hard to do with a physical card game, because numbers on cards change constantly and shields get knocked off and cards get boosted and whole rows of cards get boosted, and numbers are changing on the card so much that like a number physically printed on a card would mean virtually nothing, once you start employing those abilities. this is a little bit of a side tangent, but for me to want to play a digital only role-playing game, I feel like it would have to have, whether it's a combat system or some other system, that's kind of like that the digital is really helping realize and perhaps make easier than if you were to try to play it physically.
You know what could help with that, Ben, is AI.
No! Damn it!
Badge on.
They
Suck in the
won.
spray bottle.
Watch it. Watch Fantasy Grounds and see what happens over the next year and a half.
Mhm.
I think good things, big things will probably be happening.
You know what was interesting? Just kind of in the background, and I think this did experience kind of a slow decline over the years that it was up, and I don't mean anything by that, but just to my perception, is the Deborah Ann Woll live play, Children of Urte, which Adam Bradford was one of the cast members for, finished, I think, only like 4 months ago. But it just kind of seemed to... It was like, Demi Plane is doing a live play, and Deborah Ann Woll is going to be the GM.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the pattern for most actual plays is that you get kind of your build-up of hype, and then you establish your loyal fan base and audience who will stick through the whole thing. I think it's pretty normal, like if you look at any actual play, to see a big spike of views on the first episode or two, and then it kind of settles down into its actual sort of viewership numbers. But they were running solid and they were doing some cool stuff the whole way through. So I don't know. Good for them. I think it's cool to have maintained that for such a long time. Great cast members too.
Yeah. I just wonder what if and is there any connection there? Like, was Children of Urte... Well, no, not really. I mean, maybe it just kind of panned out this way.
Conspiracy theorist. He believes that Avril Lavigne was replaced by a clone.
Wait, she wasn't? Are you actually trying to say that she wasn't? Because come on, Dael. Have you seen the photo?
That's also complicated.
Speaking of conspiracy theories, Paramount Plus drops the D&D live action TV show, which is no longer in production at Paramount Plus. The 8-episode series first announced 18 months ago. I remember us talking about it 18 months ago. It was announced shortly before the D&D movie, so I was just reading my own notes there, trying to make sense of them. Here's the conspiracy part. Everybody get your conspiracy cubes. I don't know why.
Conspiracy cubes?
I don't know.
I'm here for it. I don't know what that is, but I want one now.
So, potential reasons, which were reported in various places, being that Hasbro, having sold E1 to Lionsgate, and Paramount itself is rumored to be up for sale, having
Can I stop you right there, Ben? Can I save you the speculation? Because literally 6 hours ago, Paramount merged with Skydance.
Oh, wow. There you go.
So
Shawn.
Skydance is a media company owned by David Ellison. And if that name does not sound familiar to you, it should, because he is the son of Larry Ellison, who is probably somewhere between the 4th and the 8th most wealthy person on the planet. He was the Oracle CEO founder. And so that happened. So why did Paramount drop this show? It probably dropped a lot of things as they were trying to get this merger deal done. Just happened. So the show may end up somewhere. It may not. It's not being completely scrapped. Hasbro will continue to search for someone who will be able to produce and host and do this movie.
You're a titan, Shawn. Amazing.
We did news.
We did news.
Yeah.
Guys, well done. Team?
I mean, I'd say team, but I really think it was Shawn.
It was Shawn.
Less teamwork, more Shawn work, I think is what that was.
That's just the new motto of the Lorecast: less teamwork, more Shawn work. Well, speaking of Shawn work, The History of Dungeons and Dragons is a book that is on its way. I wasn't going to talk about this because, we try not to just talk about, product releases. But there was an interesting tidbit that fell out about this. The Wizards of the Coast were doing kind of a presentation of this book to the media, I believe, to some media folks, trying to get them excited for this 576-page long book. I think one article headline I read was like, this book could be used to kill a kobold. It's so big and thick and big. It's massive, big book. Anyway, the Wizards of the Coast were asked during this press conference, if you will, how the book intends to tackle some of Dungeons and Dragons, let's say, problematic history. Specifically around, just for example, sexism in the game, particularly in the artwork early on around women imperiled in situations that seemed a bit questionable.
Older editions where Gygax gave women -2 to strength just out of the box. Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. That that kind of stuff. The answer that they gave was that the book isn't trying to sand down the history or sanitize the history of D&D, but rather call it out when that history is proved or shown to be offensive, and try to give historical context around why things may have been presented in the way that they were back in the books in those days. That context being they old books.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I always think it's funny when something like this is like, we're going to situate it in historical context. And I'm like, yeah, it's like 30 years ago. It's like, it wasn't okay then. But having said that, I don't think that, I think that's an uncharitable first reaction for me to have. I think that, a historical context is only ever a positive. I just think that it's a little bit funny when we're talking about something so recent.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair because you're right. Like
we're talking about your older brother.
I just can't wait for 20 years from now when we are all being harangued for something that we've said. By the people who are, in their, teens, early 20s in 20 years. It'll happen. It's going to happen to you. Enjoy it. Enjoy it when it happens.
After the cyborgs and the androids finally get their civil rights, we're gonna have to answer for this AI talk.
Your anti-AI stuff is going to come back to haunt you.
We didn't understand back then. It was only the 2020s.
Yes.
Someone call up Pascal. I've got a wager for him.
They didn't want to give us our intelligence. People pop.
Ben, you're going to get canceled for that by robots in 30 years.
Yeah.
They're going to dig this up. Historical context don't matter.
I just want you all to know I do not condone what Ben just did.
He even did the bee-boo bops. Yes. You don't do the bee-boo bops.
I told him it was wrong, but no one believed me.
Mm-hmm. Oh man,
this is a false equivalency we're making here, folks. This does not compare to real world racism text, and we're making a joke.
We're being very silly.
Moving on to some listener emails, which you can email Ghostfire Gaming's podcast, the Eldritch Lorecast, this one, by emailing podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. That's the email. So you should send your emails there, and we will talk about them here. Such as Nathaniel asking, what is better, a two-hit system where you roll to hit and then roll to wound, or a damage threshold system where it is a single dice roll that, if you roll over a certain amount, it's just going to do damage. You don't need to worry about rolling again. Does it affect other parts of the system if you have one or the other? And what are the pros and cons of both sides?
I will start by saying that these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You could have a two-hit system and a damage threshold system working together in the same game, and you could have a system that does neither. So we can't necessarily answer that question as in general. You can look at systems that do both. Here for me is the question. There are two questions at the foundation of this. In any role-playing game system, what are the resources that the players track, and how does the removal of those resources or the refreshing of those resources work in terms of the game mechanics and of the narrative that flows from the game? If we break it down to that, you can start seeing the complexity of trying to compare these two sort of systems. if that makes sense.
So the conversation that is happening about 2-hit rolls and damage reduction stuff is happening because we're seeing RPGs like Daggerheart and the MCDM RPG move in that direction. There's been a lot of conversation over the past 5-10 years in D&D about, is the 2-hit roll bad? Because it can result in a null result. Nothing happens. You did something on your turn and nothing happened. Plus, it has some other bits and bobs of, do we really need one roll to determine if anything happens and then another roll to determine the magnitude of what happened? Especially in a system as fine grain as hit points are, where the magnitude roll does not always have a very significant effect on the gameplay. So why not just strip it down to one or the other? One, you do something, bam, and it's of a certain magnitude, or you automatically hit, so let's just determine the magnitude of it now. And it's interesting to me that we have not seen any go in the direction of keep the 2-hit roll, lose the damage roll. I think that's very interesting to note. We like the damage roll, we'll keep the damage roll. We'll just say you automatically hit because it's more compelling, because you automatically get that feeling of, woohoo, I did it. I did it automatically. Let's see what happens from the fact that I did it. I think the pros and cons of it often boil down to speed, simplicity, and serotonin. The 3 S's. That's nothing. I made that up. But
I love it.
Speed is obvious. A lot of game design is moving towards speed and simplicity. They go hand in hand. You want your combat systems to be fast, especially if they're story forward, but you want to be fast too, even if they're tactical forward, because as we've seen in 4th edition D&D and the MCDM RPG, tactical combat is very long and slow because you're thinking a lot. You're taking a lot of time to mull over what is the right decision. So let's say you're playing chess, right? The original tactics RPG, the original fantasy tactics RPG with grid-based combat. Once you have spent your 3 days mulling over how you will face down, pawn to E4, when your grandmaster opponent has made their opening move to control the center, you want to think about the why am I doing this, and you don't want to worry so much about the making a roll after you do it. So story and tactics, they both have good reason to speed up the gameplay that happens post tactical decision. I'm running out of steam on this. Anyone want to come bail me out here?
Yeah, I'll come and Dael you out.
Hey,
Oh! That's my new catchphrase. Expect to hear it at least 3 times an episode from now on. No, I just think, I feel like I'm not treading any new ground here, but when it comes to game design and choices like this, elements like this that kind of fold into game design, yes, they do impact every other element of the game design, but it's important that I don't think that any one design choice is inherently positive or negative. We can talk about what are the pros and cons of each, but that actually only matters in this genre or in that, context, or, is going to shift and change. Something that can be a con in the context of a high fantasy tactical game might be a pro in a totally different genre, in a totally different context, in a game that you only play one session rather than an ongoing campaign. So I don't think any of these choices are inherently positive or negative. It all comes down to the mouthfeel and the math feel. Another catchphrase that I coined recently. I'm a catchphrase machine, because you're trying to evoke different feelings. You might have a game where you don't want people to think, "Wahoo! I hit the bad guy." As strange as that seems, all of these are just functions. They are mechanics, but you build the story of what's happening around those mechanics, and you can twist them into different shapes. I've made a point in multiple videos of mine that the core mechanics that we are used to seeing, particularly in like D20 fantasy tabletop RPGs, you just have to change the language around them and they can mean different things. It can feel a different way. And that's kind of ultimately what's happening here. And like Shawn was saying, you can have games that incorporate both of those things or neither of those things. It really is just a method of getting from point A to point B. And it's really up to you and what you're trying to achieve. So I think particularly if you're trying to kind of get into the guts of game design, it's not super helpful to think about a mechanic as positive or negative. It's more about, what am I achieving? What's Ben laughing at? What's happening now?
I didn't want to interrupt this discussion, but the chat just cracked me up because you said, "Why do I hit the bad guy?" To which Roman commented, and then somebody else was like, "Is that the name of the MCDM RPG revealed?" And I just thought, in the context of Flea Mortals, why do I hit the bad guy?
An MCDM game.
Cole, are you watching? Cole, are you in the chat?
Like, it just, I can imagine that on the bookshelf next to Flea Mortals is Flea Mortals, and wow, I hit the bad guy. Sorry, I was trying not to interrupt you, Dael. I'm so sorry.
They go for that sort of onomatopoeic actual dialogue thing for the titles. Yeah, I think it fits.
They just got Dailed out, is what I think.
Mm-hmm. There's number 2. We've got about 7 minutes for number 3.
We'll find it.
Now, help me out here. Help me out here. In Daggerheart, there is a 2-hit system, right? You roll 2 dice, you add them together, add your modifier, and see if you beat the evasion score of the enemy, right?
I believe so. I have not dug into the latest playtest rules very deeply, but yes, I do believe that's the case.
All right, so there is a 2-hit system.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you hit, there is also a damage threshold system where you can do a certain number of points that translate to damage, but you can also invoke armor to reduce that threshold to the point where you take no damage. So in that sense, Daggerheart uses both systems, kind of.
Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't even say it uses them kind of. I think it uses them definitely. Because that damage mitigation system, well, maybe kind of is appropriate, because Daggerheart's damage mitigation system is interesting. It wants the excitement of high numbers and the simplicity of small numbers. So it translates damage rolls into smaller health values, where you have certain thresholds at which you take minor, moderate, and major wounds, or minor, major, and severe, or something along those lines. And then you can spend armor points to mitigate that damage down, so you can pop yourself into a lower threshold. It's a very cool system, but it's definitely not a simplistic system. It's adding complexity for greater, I don't know, engagement, interest, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, for a game that says this is a narrative game, that's a lot to do, but if it's done in a way that is engaging and not necessarily slow, then it can work. Too
often people, and I'm guilty of this too, certainly, will conflate narrativist with low mechanics. And that's absolutely not true, because mechanics can create narrative. And in fact, all mechanics create narrative in one way or another. And so when people design mechanics to do a certain thing, not only do we want it to serve a game design function, but we want it to do double duty and create a certain type of story. So if you want to create a story of, throwing your entire armor's weight behind a single blow and feeling that, that greatsword tear your chest plate away, leaving you exposed, but you stand as the smoke clears and you are unharmed by the blow, then that's a great narrative beat that's created by a somewhat complex mechanical system.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that Daggerheart uses that, because that feels like a very roll to hit, roll to wound, roll an armor save without the rolling the armor save that Warhammer is famous for using.
Well, I think this sort of thing exposes the difficulty in calling the MCDM game the high tactics game and Daggerheart the high narrative game, because they both have made decisions as to where to put their focus. Right? MCDM is the one that got rid of the 2-hit roll and just make it into a damage roll. That's more like what I'm talking about, where the tactical decision is where you put your piece and what you do on your turn, rather than where all the random numbers will show up. Whereas Daggerheart takes in a slightly different direction.
And that's where it also comes in of, does it affect other parts of the system? Because yes, it does. Because if you do mark off an armor, then you have to have a way to take that resource and refresh it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the narrative of that? When does that happen? How often does that happen? So if you break it down to its finest element, it's just a big mathematical equation that's too complex for my small brain to figure out.
It's so real because even then I'm like, okay, but is it a refresh thing? Like, do you start at the cap and it gets eaten away, or do you have to build it up over time? Which is another there's so many dials.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then it's, well, if I buy new armor, if I can't refresh my armor, can I just go buy new armor in the next town and start all over again? That narrative element has to be thought about before you mechanically put that into the system. Otherwise, every town is going to have an armor shop, and they're going to be the most popular shop in all the land.
And there's a novelty aspect to it as well, right? Because when I hear of Daggerheart system, your armor is, it's shredded when it runs out of armor points. It must be repaired before you can regain those points. And that could be, with an armor smith, or you can use your own abilities to do that. I see the ability to have scenes, kind of cozy scenes, downtime scenes. If you're watching Delicious in Dungeon right now, scenes at camp where you are, working on repairing your armor together with your teammates, and that's the opportunity to have some character development as you do an action in the fantasy world. But will you want to do that at the end of every single session? Is the question. Will that novelty carry the story every single time? I guess it doesn't have to. You can always totally just we'll have an armor repair scene, and we want to have it be a scene. Every other day it'll just be like, and you repaired the armor.
At the end of the day, if you want the simplest, cleanest mechanics for this kind of a game, you really have to default back to when you were a kid, and you just back and forth go. And what if? And how about if when I hit you with my sword? How about what if your armor? Sorry,
no, I'm tarrying on.
Chat just said, chat's going so fast, no one will know I'm the real Avril Lavigne.
Good luck editing this week.
Yeah, have fun, Dante. R.I.P. What did you say before, James? Was it the S's or the
speed,
simplicity?
Serotonin,
yeah.
I like that because for me, I want to have that coined. We'll put it on a coin. We'll frame it. We'll put it up somewhere.
You'll actually coin the phrase.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they mean, right?
Take it to the mint.
Because that's what I think. Like, I don't have a problem with failed 2-hit rolls, right? I don't necessarily personally have a problem with null results. But I think that is because I come from a wargaming background where A, null results are somewhat expected because it's a more competitive game, but B, you're also rolling the dice much more often in a war game. Even if it's a 4-way game and like 4 people have to take a turn, typically you're still rolling armor saves or something yourself.
Yeah.
And you kind of at that point are hoping for the null result because you want to have deflected the damage. So speed is taken out of it in an RPG because you're not getting to roll your dice as often, whether as it exists in a war game. So it's kind of like if you can hit those 3 things, that's the kind of.
Unfortunately, you could only choose 2. It's like work, social, rest.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
yeah, so someone in chat mentioned this in that if you take out the 2-hit roll, you no longer have that little serotonin hit of woohoo, I hit the bad guy. Yippee, I hit the, what did I say? Yippee, I hit the bad guy.
No, wahoo.
Wahoo. Wahoo. Wahoo. I hit the bad guy. Yeah, I mean, that's the main benefit of a big 2-hit roll. Will a big damage roll satisfy the same urge? Maybe.
Well, that's I'm comparing again. I'm going to war games, but kind of through a couple of different lenses of comparing, like, if the full spectrum is you roll to hit, you roll to wound, or you roll your damage, perhaps in that second one, and then you have an armor save as perhaps like the most distended version of the 3 steps that could be taken. And then seeing how different games tackle that, because Roman commented, this was a while ago in chat, but I saved the comment here because I wanted to go back to it, that in Fragged Empire, which is an Australian tabletop role-playing game, you roll to hit, but you do not roll damage. Each weapon has a certain amount of damage. So it's not a damage threshold system. You're still rolling to see if you hit or miss, but if you hit, you do a certain amount of damage. And the war game Infinity functions kind of similarly, where it's one roll to see if you hit, and then your opponent gets armor saves against that hit, but different types of weapons will inflict different effects on an armor save, such as requiring 3 saves to inflict 3 wounds off of one hit, which changes how each gun feels to fire within the context of that game. Whereas Warhammer 40k famously does 2 hit, 2 wound, 2 armor save, but you're rolling like 27 dice at any one time, and that system is kind of just a sieve to minimize damage that's inflicted on any one roll.
We're still in the realm of essentially hit points. There has to be a system out there that is literally 2 hit and nothing else. Like if you get hit, you are dead. There has to be something, even if it's Space Invaders.
But, I can imagine an RPG where you're playing as like a party, right? Every player controls an adventuring party and every hit is a death. But isn't that just hit points with, people? Hit people points?
And if you hit, you die, you have to have resources in there to block that. And those resources that you block with are hit points. You can call it whatever you want, but you are reducing those resources that are blocking the strike that will kill you. So, yeah.
It's also,
which is why the word hit point or the term hit points is so sort of ubiquitous, is because it means so many different things. It's just how many times can you get hit? Right. Is it health? Is it armor? Who's to say? But you can get hit a certain number of times.
Yeah, and that's why I try to call them resources, because spells are also hit points. Either hit points done or hit points recovered or hit points avoided being
so
lost.
Real.
And yeah, so it's all math. It's all math feeling.
That brings up another point, which is if we try to simplify the artifice too much, then we risk revealing it, right? Because D&D is a resource management game, and at the end of the day, all the resources are the same one, your hit points. And if everyone's hit points are reduced to 0, it's game over. But by obfuscating that between a number of different spendable resources, then it creates this illusion of reality. And if we try and simplify too much, suddenly we get shaved down to nothing, and it's all bare. The trick is laid bare.
Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain.
Speaking, rather, not just thinking, but also speaking, using our voices to speak aloud, of laying things bare. It is time to lay this Twitch channel bare, because we're not going to be here anymore because it's the end of the episode. We hit 1,000 subs, 1,000 followers, I should say, on Twitch, which thank you.
Woo-hoo.
And I've been noticing a lot of first-time chatters this episode. So, wahoo, I hit the bad guy. So thank you for joining. If you want to join us live on Twitch, you can do so by following this song. 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on a Monday, 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday. Or gadgets on YouTube. The likes, the subscribes, the stars, all that stuff helps get us out to far more listeners. We appreciate you being here. I've been Ben Byrne, here with James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
Ben, can we get a Wahoo I Hit the Bad Guy t-shirt? Can we make that one?
Now I feel like we'd get sued by Mario, though, because now I want to hear it like,
Woohoo! I hit the bad guy. Conspiracy cube.
Conspiracy cube.
just a black cube that says conspiracy cube on it.
That's just cryptic enough to work.
I'm a conspiracy cubist.
Is that like Picasso was dead and replaced by a ghost?